This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal Podcast, we are back in episode 3 of our series on fashion for 2023, season 3. We're here, and today we're doing an episode called The Zen of Bridal. Now, this is really fun because most people don't know Brady's background. She is an independent bridal seamstress. She's been doing this for 10 years. She has been around the block. She has run sewing rooms and worked in big organizations, very small organizations, and now she's doing her own thing. And so this was, in our preparation for this series, it was rather surprising how kind of difficult it was to kind of pull all these things together, because there are so many different traditions and ideas around what to wear and ritual clothing and all this type of thing. And it's a lot. So, but today we're going to talk about all things bridal, because it's one of the few times, especially in centuries gone past, when you had dedicated clothing for an event. At many levels of society, even the poor would pull together something to make that day kind of special. And so we're going to dive into that today and learn more about weddings, marriages, and how fashion plays a part of it all. Brady, can I tell you have something to say?
I was just reiterating what all you were saying, because it's a weddings and funerals. It's a fascinating part of the world.
Yeah.
Fashion-wise. Well, in life-wise, but fashion-wise, especially because there's so many dedicated things to specifically that throughout history, throughout cultures. Like, it's been so many things.
Yeah. Oh no, that's when it comes to when it comes to funerals, people kind of it doesn't really go on anymore. But into the early 20th century, grave robbing was a huge problem. And it wasn't just jewelry.
Cameron, can we stop? Because I don't think I hooked up my headphones and I don't want it to echo on your end.
No, hang on. With funerals, grave robbing was quite a problem well into the 20th century. And one of the most common things that were stolen wasn't just jewelry, it was shoes. Yeah, because shoes were expensive, and if you owned them. Yeah, and if you owned a 2 pair your whole life, that was a lot.
And you would be buried in your best pair of shoes. So those shoes
would
be useful.
Yes, and that was actually one of the when I was writing my most recent novel, The Sweetgrass Saga, when a slave would die in the field or whatever other situation, the 2 things that would get stolen the most, shoes and clothes.
Yep.
So not only have you died picking cotton or plowing a field, but then the minute you die, the only things that you really ever kind of sort of possessed in your life were immediately taken, which is quite ill dignified. But getting back to bridal, much happier subject. Let's just start on a real down note. There's definitely a couple things that have been pretty, important to the whole bridal thing. So one of the things we first mentioned was how particular the fashion requirements can be in a bridal setting. So for example, having your shoulders covered in a Catholic service, that's a
Mhm.
very big thing. Um
Certain Baptist churches require having your head covered, not just by a veil, but an actual head covering.
Right. And especially in bridal, you have this whole thing of this portmanteau of fashion, religion, modesty, and purity. And that goes throughout the ages. I mean, all the way back to antiquity.
Yeah, it's
So
very complicated.
yes, and obviously varies heavily by culture and religion.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's kind of a theme that we're gonna see throughout. I wanted to start because women's is so much more complicated. I wanted to start with what men wear at weddings because you get a lot of there's been a lot of variance. It's usually the style of whatever is common at that time period, but especially in Europe you have a lot of military regalia, which you don't really see a whole lot anymore unless somebody who's active duty military is getting married or it's like a royal wedding.
Yeah.
um
Well, and even here, if they're active duty, they usually do still wear their dress uniform.
right.
A lot of times I feel like that a lot of times comes from, yes, pride in all of that, but also then we don't have to go out and buy a suit and get it fitted because we already have one situations. So
Free
yes.
from the government, yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, yes, no, absolutely. And then yes, and also then and also having like what I think one of the things that I found interesting in my kind of when I was thinking about this was how like the standard morning dress suit with the tails and the waistcoat, which was like
Yeah.
bog standard wedding attire. In the 1980s, we switched to the tuxedo and haven't looked back in
Hmm.
America. Now the
And
British
now we're
was
not even
still,
doing tuxedos anymore.
yeah, now the
Hardly ever.
tuxedo is out in favor of,
Hmm.
some off the peg suit from somewhere.
Hmm. Yep.
So,
Usually in some bright color and, in my opinion, ill-fitting by being shorts, pants, and hipster-looking tightness.
yeah, well, I think that's also a very the whole the style of tight pants. There's a tailor named Derek on Twitter that I follow, and he has noticed that like the tight clothing thing is a very millennial thing. Xers don't tend to do it, and Gen Z is moving away from it. It's like Gen Z is
Yeah.
bringing back like the wide pant leg. People forget suits got ridiculously loose in like the mid 90s. Like
Oh,
you had
yes.
that like pant legs got out of control. It was a problem. So like pant
Mhm.
legs got out of control, jackets got super loose, like, and I think that was what the appeal of like having everything much tighter was for a long time.
Yeah.
um and I
And
think for yeah.
it is attractive to show the shape of the body. That's always a nice thing. I just would prefer that your pants hit your shoes, but that's my
Yes.
preference.
No, that is yeah, the whole yeah. I mean, I think if you're going to do pants that don't hit your shoes, you've got to commit. So like it
Mhm.
needs to stop at like mid calf. It shouldn't be
Yeah.
like a down to your ankle so your ankle bone is showing. If you're going to have shorter pants, commit. Bring those
Right.
suckers up to it. Do shorts at the knee. Do three-quarter length at the mid calf, but don't just leave us your ankle bones hanging out. It makes no
Because it just
sense.
looks like you haven't bought a suit since you were 12, in my opinion.
Right, exactly. You just kind of outgrew it somehow.
Yeah.
Yes, no, that is 110% a thing. And that is kind of funny how that has been kind of become the style. We don't have a lot of ritual clothing anymore, but marriage is still one where that it's kind of in our society, it is the last holdout of ritual clothing for an occasion,
We do, yes.
you
Mhm.
know. Especially as we don't I mean, I suppose if you're Catholic, baptismal gown is still a thing, but I mean, as people are less religious, that has become less common.
Yes.
you know.
But weddings are still very ritualistic in the clothing
Yes,
options.
right. And it was also we also kind of noted um because we really kind of got into this. We got a little crazy. Um, I think the best thing, kind of the great thing about bridal is this whole idea of ritual clothing extends to all sorts of different cultures. So in India, we have the sari, which is always usually in red and gold, very colorful. Um, in China, lots of red and gold accents in styles varying by the period, depending on what they wore when whoever was in charge. And traditionally embroidered with a dragon and a phoenix. And actually, there's a great movie called Curse of the Golden Flower with Chow Yun Fat and Gong Li. It's in Cantonese with either English dub or English subtitles, and they have um, ritual robes for the dragon and the phoenix that are really elaborate.
Mm.
Um, the Chinese kind of went all out on that movie. They did all the period correct clothing, all the real gold accessories, and they also built a replica of the Forbidden Palace in like out
Oh,
some
wow.
Western province. Yeah, they went a little overboard. Like
Yeah.
it was really. But if you want to see the symbology as it was under the 11th century Tang Dynasty, that's a great movie to watch. And also, every single thing Gong Li wears in that movie um is amazing.
Mhm.
Like
I bet.
it's just a constant fashion. I mean, and they had all these elaborate wrapped hairstyles because women didn't cut their hair back then. So all these elaborate wrapped
Yes.
hairstyles, all this. I mean, it was out of control. That whole movie is just visually stunning. Um and
Well, in so from my what my research said, the symbology of it is the reason why you have the gold dragon, golden green, usually on a red dress, is for protection, and the phoenix is for prosperity. So it is bringing protection and wealth, and that's why it's built into the bridal gown.
Yeah. Well, there's yes, and there's I mean, especially in a culture that is very superstitious and believes in luck, that sort of stuff has a lot of weight. Um,
Very
yeah.
powerful.
Yeah, in a way that it doesn't necessarily so much so in Western societies. I still laugh about the lady in China who was flying by air the first time and threw coins into the engine for protection on her journey, delayed the flight by 2.5 hours because they had to find all the coins and get them out of the engine. So
Yeah.
yeah, um, yeah,
But I mean,
that's
we still, I know many, many brides here that still abide by the something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue.
yes.
That's still a thing.
Yes, no, no, no letting the groom see you in your wedding dress before the
Yep.
altar. Yeah, that one.
Yes.
A couple of those have still persisted. That is true.
Hmm.
They've they've
And
they've clung
even
on.
the concept of a veil and a train are old concepts that are still used today.
Yes. Yes, very much so. Speaking of that, we're gonna dash back to antiquity real quick. So because the veil thing goes throughout different cultures, throughout different history. And in ancient Rome, they had a lot when it came to what the bride wore. She had to wear a lot of things. She had a lot going on. Um, she had a lot of headgear, but especially things around the veil. You had usually roses, some sort of wreath, um, and and usually the veil would be decorated sometimes with flowers just kind of in the fabric, all this type of thing. But interestingly enough, all the here, speaking of weird superstitions, all the guests would wear the same clothes as the groom and the bride. It says here from Wikipedia, the Romans believed that if bad omens showed up during a wedding, it would indicate the couple was evil or unlucky. In order for a marriage to be successful, there needed to be no evil omens, and everyone must follow the traditional customs. So, Again, more bridal superstitions. So
Well, and if you, I mean, that is at least, I don't know, I'd have to research this part more because I didn't think about that part, but that's similar to the reasons why we have bridesmaids and groomsmen, especially the bridesmaids, because the whole theory was that if you dressed several other women just like the bride, then the spirits couldn't tell which one the bride was, or a conquering tribe couldn't tell who the bride was to steal her. So we dress them all together. But now, I mean, the bride definitely dresses differently now, but I that's as far as I know where that tradition came from.
yeah, well, and it's funny. There's some other weird bride stealing traditions that have gone on. Like before the wedding. There's a couple. I know that in Minnesota, Wisconsin, kind of upper Midwest, because they're all Scandinavian. Um, there's uh there's some bride stealing traditions that are quite fun and entertaining. Just different weird things people do that their great 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 grandparents brought from the old country and they kept
Hmm.
doing because it was fun, sort of thing. Lost a lot of the
Yeah.
cultural context, but things that kept going. So yes, so the point is that you had all um all these sort of different, again, the clothes leading the whole, kind of bridal, kind of bridal pathway. Even for the young man, he would wear something called the toga virilis, which was a short toga. And also interestingly enough, as for clothing, the bride would wear a tunica recta, and she would weave it herself, and it was one woven piece, which we talked about in episode 1. Um, and so there was kind of throughout the day there was all these different things that you would wear for different times. Like there's a specific piece of clothing that she would wear for the wedding night, and so by the time a Roman wedding is done, you've gone through 3 outfits just to get married. The lady has gone through 3, the man has gone through 1. The point is, so you're getting married, you're gonna need a lot of clothes. That was especially in the Roman tradition, a big part of things. And then I know you wanted to talk about this because I noted it down. Veils. You particularly had something to say about that, so this is your opportunity.
I am, well, veils similarly to what we were talking about with bridesmaids and stuff like that. Um, One, it is to demonstrate purity and piety by not showing her face, not being too provocative, kind of thing. But back in the day, a lot of it started with if you cover her face, then no one knows who to steal. One.
Oh,
But
yeah.
also, if you cover her face, then he may have paid a dowry for somebody and you get the older sister instead because we got to get her sold off. So we would cover her face so that you didn't know exactly who you might be marrying.
Yes, and it also says here in the notes that veils date back to ancient Rome when they would wrap the brides from head to toe in a veil to hide her away from the spirits that might want to thwart her happiness. People also saw delivering a bride in a veil represented her being a modest and untouched maiden.
Yes, it's
So
very much,
more of that purity and chastity and all
yeah,
that sort of thing.
very much the purity and chastity part. Currently, styles, veils do not go over the face anymore. Veils just trail off the back of your head. I mean, occasionally it'll go over the face, but it's very rare. In a lot of Hispanic and Spanish cultures, it just comes down with the lace um, that way. And a lot of more American and European styles, it's just straight off the back.
Yeah, the lace on the sides, that's a very Spanish, Italian, Southern Europe
Yes.
thing. That even if you get into like the former Yugoslavia in Christian cultures, you'll see that that's a very Southern European tradition.
Yeah. The
Even when
men,
like
yeah, just whoop.
yes, yep, that's a very
Mhm.
Southern European tradition. So yes, no, all but this again, it's a very strange thing. The ones that I always love are the and you don't see them very much anymore, but the ones where the veil extends way down the back. I kind of like that over the dress. You don't see
Oh,
that very
no.
much anymore.
Here's the thing, no, cathedral veils are starting to come back, like, the ones that are longer than the back of the dress, they're actually starting to come back into fashion again.
No, there you go.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
didn't see
no,
that coming. I really did not see that coming, but yeah, the big, long cathedral veil that hits past the train of the dress is coming back.
no, that no, that's
And I
legit.
mean,
I
that
mean, I
makes
think
me
it's very beautiful,
very
so I'm all in favor of it.
well, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's coming back because it makes it very dramatic and also great for pictures because it's long and
Yes.
cascading and
Oh my goodness. I saw a video the other day of this poor bride. She had walked all the way down the aisle, got to the altar, and realized that she had a sort of poof thing attached to her dress that they forgot to put on.
oh no.
So she's standing there, and like four people come along with this thing and start attaching. She literally forgot to put on half of her dress. It was so cute.
This is why all of my friends invite me to their weddings so that things like that don't happen.
Yes, it was quite entertaining. So I want to move on to the Middle Ages because we start to begin to see the beginning sort of seeds of modern bridal. Um
Mhm.
so um there wasn't a tremendous amount of difference between regular everyday clothing and bridal clothing in the Middle Ages. A lot of the sort of, nice, cool medieval costumes of today are very similar to what a bride would have worn. Jewel tones were popular. Velvet as a fabric was quite popular. Um, and there was usually a head covering called a cotardi that went from the head all the way down to the ankles, um, and even and there was usually when it came to it was more of a cape, but it was also something also worn by men and got progressively shorter as you reach the Renaissance. So if you look at like King Richard III, which I'm actually distant relative of. I found out last year. Um, if you look at, then you see these very long, like the signing of the Magna Carta, these long sort of cloaks, and then by the time you get to Henry VIII in the 15th century, the cape has gotten quite short. Um, and
Mhm.
so that changing styles and things like that. But as far as the bridal thing goes, that was something where you would still have these specific clothes and fabrics made for the occasion. They just tended to be the same style of what they wore, just nicer, which I thought was
Yes.
interesting and practical.
Yes, very much so.
And yes, and that also the for men the popularity um of uh of hosiery and having those tied in with leather to not need shoes, which I thought was
Mhm.
interesting. um so you'd end up with just kind of sort of a leather covering over the feet. Another movie recommendation, if you want to see medieval bridal styles of the 15th and 16th century, the 1960 version of Taming of the Shrew with Elizabeth Taylor is a great kind of fashion palette of clothing styles and bridal styles of that period. So
Which
if you want
actually, for the 1960s, they did an amazing job because the 1960s wasn't known for doing their period piece costumings well.
no.
And The Taming of the Shrew, they did incredibly accurate.
Yes. So that's why I put it down as a movie recommendation. That's a good movie recommendation for seeing those styles of that period. There are also some really great YouTube channels that cover these different styles, like Karolina Zabrowska from Poland. There's a whole kind of coterie of fashion YouTubers doing period revival stuff now, and they're making their own patterns, they're analyzing, they're looking through books, they're doing the most. And
Mhm.
so if you ever want to get into that, that's a great resource as well. But for cheap and easy for medieval wedding styles, Taming of the Shrew 1960 with Elizabeth Taylor, look for that. For there as well. Then in the Renaissance, we moved on to very similar styles, but they were elaborate and included way more fabric. And I laughed about this, especially in on the continent. They wanted these giant pleats around the butt area, so the dress would gather in the back, and they'd have like 6 or 7 of these huge pleats right over the butt, which I thought was very entertaining.
I mean, if you really think about it, though, that's the beginning of the bustle.
It is. It is, and it's also a great lead into the Panier style of the 18th century.
Hmm.
But it was just kind of funny to be kind of like, that women today would be horrified. Why would you want that much fabric on?
Oh, yes. I mean, even bustling up a train for my brides today, some of them think it looks great. Some of them are like, but does that make my butt look big? And I'm like, if anybody thinks that much fabric is
Mhm.
actually your butt, they really need to be looking at other things than your butt. Just saying.
No, this is why when women keep saying, why do women's clothing have no pockets? I tell them it's because women do not want things that make their hips or butt look big. And that's why women's
Yep.
clothing doesn't have pockets,
Yeah, it's true. That
which
is unfortunately true.
might
I
seem
mean, that is not
impractical.
the actual original region, but that's definitely doesn't help.
There's obviously a cost savings aspect. Putting in
Yeah.
pockets is expensive. Okay. But the reality is that when you look at the sales numbers, things with more pockets don't sell as well. They
Hmm.
don't. Because when the thing is, when you start putting stuff in pockets, your hips look bigger, your butt looks bigger. Women don't want. So then those things with pockets don't sell very well. And then the designers say, well, why spend the money? Just
Hmm.
send it out without pockets. Save the money and your sales numbers are higher. Capitalism strikes again. So,
Yep.
but it's also, I think, in all of these conversations, I think Bridal is particularly emblematic of this, changing ideas and standards of beauty,
Hmm.
as this ages and centuries go by, and what is considered, because a wedding is you want to be your most attractive, you want to wear the nicest things you can get a hold of, all this sort of thing. So it's really emblematic of, what is the style of that day and time, what appearance was most valued.
Yes, very much exactly. And that's why, as we get further on in history, in times where people didn't have a lot, um, poverty and stuff like that, you just wear your Sunday best because that's was your best dress. That's what you had. Or also why dresses used to get passed down from mother to daughter to daughter to daughter because again, they were expensive and you had access to this, somebody spent a lot of money on this dress and so other people should wear it. Like my grandmother's dress was worn by three of her sister-in-laws. They just all wore the same dress for their weddings.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it's expensive, so why waste the money, and that's,
Mhm.
I mean, when we have a lot of these conversations, it's important to note, the regular average person was not involved in these conversations until industrialization comes along in the 19th century. The vast
Yes.
majority of the clothes and the styles we talk about were the purview of either the trading classes or the nobility and royalty. If you were a
Yes.
common everyday person, you wore the dress that didn't have so many patches with it down to the church. That was what you did.
Mhm.
Or
Yep.
you passed the same dress around, whatever happened.
Picked your
Yes.
favorite one or asked your friend for one.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. The average everyday person was not even involved in these sorts of conversations in any meaningful and realistic way. But like even in something like the story of Cinderella, where she takes an old dress from the attic and tries to make something new until it's destroyed by her evil stepmother and stepsisters. That was that story set in the 18th
Oh,
century. That was very common before today. I mean,
oh
very,
yeah,
very
yeah.
common. Yeah. And
Yours
but
was
you
like
just
a hack.
you didn't throw clothes out if you could at all use it later, at all save it even for patches because
Yeah.
it was just too expensive. It was too expensive of a resource.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of that, we're now up to the pre-modern. Um, so in the 18th century, we had wedding dresses rather than being something like the Renaissance with having a specific style or all this type of thing. We get back to having really guzzied up versions of everyday styles. So for most of Europe, this meant the panniers, so the big hips, big wide dresses, because we thought that was the thing we should do for a while. Um,
Yeah, that was an interesting
and
choice.
yeah, and I think the most interesting thing about this period is you start to see white come up as a color,
Hmm.
which didn't
Which
really hadn't
wasn't a
really
thing
happened
before then.
before. But it was,
No.
especially like in France, it wasn't a white. It was more of an off-white, an eggshell, even down to a beige, light
Or a
yellow.
rose, you know,
Yeah.
like a light rose.
Yeah, very very light in color, so white adjacent,
Hmm.
sort of thing, which I thought was rather interesting. But obviously lots of applique, lots of brocade, and
Lots of
yes,
embellishments.
yes, and very busy.
Yes,
Very
very, very busy.
very busy. And obviously you have the popularity of wigs at the time meant people, the wealthy, could have particularly elaborate wigs for the wedding day and all this sort of thing, and that was all a part of
Hmm.
the conversation. Another movie recommendation, if you want to see these styles in action kind of all the way through, in fact they won an Oscar, the 2000, I think it's 11, Marie Antoinette with Kirsten Dunst.
Hmm.
Um, that the won an Oscar that year for costume because that's how good the clothing was. So if you want to get into that period
That's
between,
amazing.
yeah, because Marie Antoinette was actually Austrian. Um, so if you want to see sort of, Austrian and French styles of that period, how they differed and how the fashion culture was, obviously she was royalty. So for the very wealthy who lived at Versailles, who
Yeah.
were French nobility and all this type of thing, that's a great movie to go and see those particular styles and the amount of time, money, effort put in by her and her ladies in waiting on fashion and style. That was really the kind of the really the start of that. Not that it didn't exist before, but it started to become a priority, a hobby, and a thing. So she also enjoyed cosplaying as a peasant girl, and she built her own French village to go around and pretend she was a peasant girl in. So there you
I
go.
mean, sometimes we all like to play around.
Yes, people forget she was 17 when she got married,
Yeah.
and the whole thing was over by the time she was 33. It was only really she was not long lived. I don't think she reached 40 as I recall. But I mean, she was a teenager, and when you start looking at her actions through the lens of her being a teenager, a lot of it starts to make sense. Like if you
Hmm.
gave a 16-year-old the entire national treasury of the Empire of France and
Yes.
said, and have hundreds of people whose job it is to please your every whim, any teenager would probably go out of control
And
with that.
and a teenager who has been raised by people who their job is to take care of your every whim. So
Yes.
never really had much thought
No
about
sense of no sense of
that.
self-control whatsoever. None. No. So but that's a good movie recommendation for that. We're up to the 19th century, and here we have um, kind of some big changes. So, in the 19th century, wedding dresses tended to be red. The white thing didn't really come back again till the early 20th century. A lot of the common everyday people wore their Sunday best dress. I had another sort of TV movie moment in season 3 of Downton Abbey. Mrs. Patmore um and the housekeeper is getting married, and she borrows a coat from the Countess of Grantham to kind of, they ordered her a mail order dress. The dress was not great. And so they wanted to
That did tend
help.
to happen a lot. Oh, wait,
Yes,
no,
and
did
it
you
was
order
like,
up a Wish? Because that always goes wrong.
yeah, well, this was like the early 20th century British catalog version of Wish, and the dress was not
Mhm.
impressive.
Yeah.
And they're all standing in the kitchen, and Mrs. Hughes, the housekeeper, they're trying to hide it from, it was Mrs. Hughes getting married. They're trying to hide it from her. Mrs. Patmore, the cook, is like, this dress is not great. Let's see if we can help it. And so they actually borrow a coat from the Countess of Grantham, which that was a bit of drama we're not going to into right now, but they end up borrowing a coat to make the dress kind of look nicer. That was very common in the 19th century,
Oh,
you
yes.
know, and it was basically kind of a hand me down from, the nobility of that sort of like, well, we obviously have tons of clothes. Of course, I'll be nice to you, and you can have this, this coat to, for your wedding day and all this type of thing. But she would, but it was still something where like the dress was 22. It was like, I think the dress is only like 30 shillings, 4 pence, 5 farthings, which in today's money is about 25, 30 pounds. But in the 1920s, that was a lot of money. Like it was, the
That's a
whole
lot of money.
staff donated to make it happen. That was a lot of
Mhm.
money back then.
Yep.
And and so the fact that it kind of didn't turn out and it kind of needed to be helped, all this sort of thing, that's what you did.
Yeah.
That was how, and
Well,
it
and
was also, yeah.
that's why women pass dresses back and forth. That's why the tradition of passing things from mother to child happen. That's why veils get passed back and forth because it is good luck. And, like we have all these traditions around it because it was expensive and you didn't own many clothes. So owning one that was that expensive was a really big deal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that is no, and that is that I think it's a great example of how, obviously they're the servants, they don't make a lot of money, how, they kind of, were making a not great off the peg catalog dress work for her special day. And it's also because Mrs. Hughes is older when she gets married, so it's even making, the older lady's wedding special too, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
interesting traditions um in all of that. Wedding styles in the 19th century tended to follow the prevailing clothing styles of the day. So big ball gowns were popular in the
Mhm.
mid 19th century, and then as waists came in and the big bell style fell out, if you were in the 1890s, it was wasp waist. That was very
Mhm.
popular. If it was, the 1870s, the high bustle with the kind of
Bust-
flat front and
Yes.
all the fabric in the butt. Again, fabric in the butt.
Mhm.
That
Yep.
was, very popular. Yeah. So that was all that tended to follow the contours of kind of or normal ordinary fashion. That's probably what I think is most, jumping way ahead. That's, I think, what's most interesting about today's bridal culture is you now have all these styles, and
Oh,
you
yeah.
pick the style that's suitable for your body type and all this type of thing. It's completely divorced from everyday fashion. I
It
mean,
is
no
100%.
one's gonna get. I mean, if we did that, everyone would be getting married in like a tank top and yoga pants, but white.
Yes, very true.
So,
Let's
like
be real.
now we have
Don't worry,
ball
there's still
gown,
gonna be the
princess,
sunglasses, okay.
teacup, drop trumpet. I mean, we have all these different styles now. We just kind of
Mhm.
pulled all the different styles from all the time periods, and we're like, you can choose from any of these.
Yeah. I literally used to have a designer, I forget what her name is. I could look her up, but who made basically shift flapper dresses. And
Yeah,
that she's a bridal designer. I mean,
yeah,
like, we have everything. We have jumpsuits, we have two-piece situations, we have detachable trains, we have everything.
yes. And oh, those the what was that one you were doing a little while ago? Someone wanted sleeves in a dress that had no sleeves, and you built them sleeves that they could wear in case of cold. Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean
Which I
it's
was confused about because she wanted them made out of tulle, so I'm not entirely sure what it would do about the cold, but it's okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, so really, what I found in the 20th century is the prevailing fashion trend and bridal style tends to start to separate in about the 1950s and 60s. The 50s is the last stand for, oh, this wedding dress is the same as a dress you would wear every day, just in white. Once from
Mhm,
then on, you start to have specific designs specifically for bridal, and things get out of control, particularly when it comes to collars and sleeves. Someone in the 70s decided all collars needed to go up to the chin, and someone in the 80s decided you need sleeves out to here, like Diana in
mhm.
81, huge poofy sleeves. And those lasted well into the 90s. The poofy sleeves, well into the 90s. It was nuts, genuinely
And you do
nuts.
realize those sleeves are underneath them is a bunch of scratchy plastic crinoline underneath them to keep them poofy so they crunch when you touch them. It's very awkward.
Yes. And so that now you have all these different, styles and ideas, and even innovations like Pina Tornay not making the dress as one piece rather two.
Mhm.
um
Yeah.
so it's now, I think it's interesting now that it is its own industry. It has its own style, it has its own designers, some of whom design ready to wear, but a lot don't. Like Vera Wang also does normal clothes and has a bridal thing, but you have a whole group of designers, that's all they do is bridal.
Mhm. It's
You
just
don't
bridal.
know their
Yeah.
names if you don't work in bridal.
Oh.
Yes, and that is, I think, very, and that's, and as it goes, that's a fairly recent phenomena. I remember Nana got married in 1960, and she did not go to a bridal salon to get. I have her dress in my closet. Um, uh, she did not go to a bridal salon. She went to a dress shop that also sold wedding dresses, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, in Binghamton, New York. I forget the name of the place. It's on the front of the box. Um, and uh, and so it was a very different. Whereas now we have David's Bridal, we have shops that's all that they do. We have alterations people that's all that they do. And it's not like it's own. It's now its own industry. It's
Oh,
its
yeah.
own thing.
It's a very large and just it's a very large industry, but a very niche industry, and so, it becomes quite entangled when you're in it, but it is definitely, like, you don't go to a big box shop to look for a wedding dress. Like David's Bridal has their own seamstresses and stuff like that, but that's the closest thing to a big box shop you're going to buy your wedding dress. Instead, you're going to all these little small boutiques to try on dresses over and over again to find the dress. And it's a
Well,
huge, like, it has gone from being this is the dress, this is my nicest dress, or this is the dress that the seamstress made for me, to being like, if you don't have that perfect wow moment, then you aren't happy with that dress. Like, there is no settling anymore for just kind of, you know, what was cheap and easy kind of a thing. No, you have to have that wow moment. Like, and that's what Say Yes to the Dress and things like that have done to make
right,
that culture of that there is no, it either has to be the dress, the most amazing dress you've ever seen, or it's not your dress. And which is good and bad. I mean, I think people should, if they're spending that much money, really love what they get. and what they feel great in. And I want people to feel lovely and beautiful, but I also feel like sometimes with some people, it sets up unreasonable expectations for what your body and your dress are going to look like combined.
Yes. Yes, that is one. And I mean that, and that's also gets the regular fashion does that as well.
Mhm.
How many times have we all fallen into the trap of buying a piece of clothing, hoping we'll look like the person on there to realize that's not your body though. Like
That's
that's
not your
not
body.
you, you know. And that is certainly true in bridal as well. And some of the requests that come through, like the my boobs are
You've
too low
listened to my
lady.
story.
Yeah,
Yes.
like the boobs are too low, lady. It's like, but that's
That's,
you, ma'am. Like that's you
and also,
though.
your boobs aren't that low. They look fine. I don't know what you're talking about. Or the one that told me, she kept showing me pictures of the model on the website, being like, well, why don't I look like this? And I was like, oh, that's because you just, like, she was gorgeous, thin, beautiful, tall, all of that. I was like, well, it's because you have like probably size C boobs and she has like an A. So that's why it looks slightly different. Yeah. But your boobs are still perky, so I think it looks fine.
Yeah, no, but
None of these
people
ideas.
get truly crazy, and I think that's something that I think that's a thread that I think somewhat goes throughout the ages, but has also been amplified today. Like I imagine in the ancient Roman household, there was a lot of, we faster, we've got to get it done. Your wedding is next week,
Yes.
So,
Why doesn't my waist look different than the way it's supposed to look? Yes.
yes, yes.
I'm pretty
I
sure it's gone
imagine.
out through the ages.
Yes, and then today it's just kind of gotten somehow worse. So, but
I mean,
yes, well, we've
give me
reached the top
pictures
of
to
the
look at.
yes, yeah, well, we've reached the top of the hour. So this has been fun. The Zen of Bridal. I knew this would be a fun discussion, and it has been. And what a journey, and everything. So, final thoughts before I close this out.
Stop setting ridiculous expectations for your wedding and realize whatever happens is going to happen and you're going to be beautiful and people are going to love it and nobody's going to notice what your bustle looks like and you're not even going to remember in 10 years. So let it go.
Very true. So, thank you everybody for listening to episode 3 of season 3 of the podcast. You can reach me online at Cameron Cowan, Cameron L. Cowan, Facebook.com/Cameron L. Cowan, or on Instagram at Cameron Cowan as well. There's 3 more episodes coming of this series. So stay tuned. And we'll keep going on this little fun fashion journey. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Bye bye.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.